Welcome to Karen's Quilt Circle. Today's guest comes from the total opposite side of the world from me, Perth, Western Australia. Ruth de Vos is an internationally recognized textile artist. Through years of practicing, experimenting, and pushing her limits, she stitches together hundreds of small pieces of fabric to create bold textile paintings in a style distinctively hers. And she's going to tell us all about it. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea, and here's my interview with Ruth de Vos. Welcome, Ruth, to my show. So glad that you could be on. You're coming to us from Western Australia, right?
That's right. Yes, in Perth, Western Australia.
So how did you come to quilting?
I guess mostly because my mum was always making things, not just quilts. My parents were Dutch migrants, so they migrated from Holland when I was a baby, 1 year old, and they didn't have like many people, I suppose, not much money. And they made a very beautiful home for us. I guess they were very economical, but also my mum was very handy. So she would make very beautiful things out of almost nothing. She would get scraps from people and curtain samples from her friend who ran a curtain shop. And she would make clothes for us and decorations for the walls and toys and bags and just everything. So that's the environment I grew up in. And she also did a bit of quilting, and that would have been in the time when the quilt rules were pretty strong. It had to be cotton and you had to do everything just right. And mum ignored all of that because she didn't have the money to go and buy the right fabric. So yeah, she just did it her own way. And I guess I learned from her, you could do whatever you like, really. No one can tell you what to do in your quilting and in your sewing. So that's where it started. And then the art quilts, in my final years of high school, I took art as one of my subjects towards my final exam results, university entrance results, and absolutely loved it. And I decided to focus on textiles because I grew up with sewing and loved sewing. And at that same time, I discovered in our town, there was one big like museum or gallery. Being a small town, there wasn't much of that kind of thing, but there was one massive gallery from a local millionaire who had vintage cars. He had, I remember, Japanese kites. He had ceramics. He had absolutely everything, but he also had a very big art collection, and they were all displayed all together. And he had quilts in there that were artworks, and that blew my mind in high school to see that I could actually take my love of sewing and that could be a genuine art form. So that was really when I kind of thought I would love to do quilts as art through my exposure in high school, I guess.
But then you went off to university. I understand that you studied sciences and engineering. When did you shift into art quilts as a career?
I'm sure this is the story of many quilters. When I became a stay-at-home mum, I absolutely love maths and science, and I did my engineering degree, but when I had children, I wanted to be at home for them. So I put that engineering aside. My firstborn was even only a few months old when I started making art quilts. That's something I always knew I would get back to when I wasn't working. And as soon as I was a stay-at-home mum, that is something I picked up again. It's built very slowly from that time, starting with just playing around with painting my own fabrics. I never dreamt that it would be the journey it's been.
So you started with painting your fabrics?
Yes. The quilt artist that inspired me in high school did that for her fabrics. There was a lot of paint and I suppose a bit of printing to get the various textures that she wanted in her fabric. So the first quilt I did once I became a mum had painted fabrics, and I didn't like the texture. So I haven't, it was pretty much that quilt that kind of told me I don't like this. I would rather dye the fabrics. And ever since then, I've dyed the fabrics rather than painting.
So dyeing fabrics is a whole sort of niche unto itself. I have a couple of friends that are just passionate dyers. Do you find that too?
I dye the fabric more just to meet my needs rather than because I actually enjoy the dyeing process. I do consider it a bit of a chore, although when I'm into the dyeing, it's a lot of fun. It started out for me when I got back into the art quilting, when I had my firstborn. We were actually living up north in a place called Karratha, which is a very small town and very isolated. So there was not much that you could purchase in town. I don't think internet shopping was a thing yet. No, there must have been a little bit. I could get hold of fabric dye and white fabric and dye my own range of fabrics. I didn't have access to a fabric shop. I wanted to work with a big range of colors, and this was the most cost-effective way to get a big range of colors. Now, that range of colors is my motivation to dye fabric. I have infinite color options when I dye my own fabric. So when I'm making a quilt that's full of eucalyptus leaves, I like a full range of grey greens. And the commercial cottons that I look at might have 100 colors in their range of solids, but their greens are not the kind of greens that I want to use in my artwork. And so there's not very many greens to choose from. So that's my main motivation for hand dyeing. Plus, it's not so flat, a hand dyed fabric. It's got that slight variation, which I just love that.
I don't really care for that flat, solid. Just even just a minor variation of the hand dyed ones, I just love. I've actually lived in Australia for a year, and we visited Western Australia, and they probably have the most beautiful sunsets out of anywhere in the world. That quality of light. Do those colors make it into your work?
Not deliberately, because I'm focusing mostly on flora, on leaves, on foliage, and then on mostly the eucalyptus blossoms. So look, the colors probably do, and what I do love is taking the local trees, and different light does give you different colors. So I suppose it does. It's not deliberate, but I think when you live in a place your whole life, you tend to take those things for granted a little bit.
I never even thought of it until you said it, but the colors of eucalyptus are a fairly distinct green as well, that if I went into my garden here, I probably wouldn't find it. And again, looking at it from different angles, I can see the need to dye that yourself and get those shades that ring true to you.
Yeah, and that's why I love focusing on the eucalyptus plants, because I think that appreciating Australian flora can be a learned skill. If you're from elsewhere, you picture lush green trees, everything's green, green, green. And you come here and it's grey and drab. And a lot of people have to really learn to appreciate the beauty in that, even people that have lived their whole life. So I love focusing on that in my quilts. And I know lots of people have said to me, now when I'm driving, I look at those trees through whole new eyes. I appreciate them so much more. Also, because the flowers are subtle. They're not, or mostly. Some trees, when they're in flower, there's like a cloud of blossoms. But there's other trees that, if you don't look carefully, you will never even notice their blossoms. That's how subtle they are. And it's partly because of our hot, dry climate that they are that way. I guess for me, it's about just reminding people of that beauty right in front of their noses.
When I was there, it was the flood. And it is so funny because everybody told me how gray and brown everything was. But when I was there in the spring, it was just this beautiful blanket of color with those spring flowers. They were only there for a minute, but I got there.
Yeah. Oh, that's special. Yeah. And when you get that carpet, that's incredibly beautiful. But they are still all pretty much all small flowers. They're not, big showy petals. They're small sturdy flowers. Yeah, and look, some people just get it straight away, but I've noticed a lot of people just need to kind of go, no, but look at it this way. It's actually really beautiful when you take a moment to see why these plants are the way they are.
So are there colors that you never ever use? Are there colors that you gravitate to? We've talked about the greens, we've talked about the pinks, but are there colors that you just don't touch?
Purple. I don't know. I just don't like purple. I'm sure I've slipped some bits in over the years, and that's probably a little challenge to myself. I actually like a bit of surprise in my work, and sometimes that's just by putting in an extra bright color or a color that doesn't quite seem to fit. And I think it just adds a bit of the unexpectedness, gives an artwork a bit, or a quilt, a bit of energy, which I love. So yeah, purple. That's just a color I don't like. But otherwise I sway a bit. So I've never been a big blue person, and initially all of my floral botanical art quilts had blue backgrounds for the sky, and we have this brilliant blue sky here, so some of that was quite blue, and after a while that was too much for me, and then I moved to like the one behind me has just a natural linen for the background rather than the blue. And I know for a lot of people blue is the best color you can have, so I know that's a bit contentious, so I go back and forth on the blue. I'm not a pink fan, which might be surprising. So in my blossoms, I try always to steer towards more of a coral color or an orangey red or a reddish pink rather than straight pink. But sometimes I'm a little bit at the mercy of my dyeing process. Dyeing red has been an ongoing struggle for me for some reason. Red is difficult, and half the time I end up with pink. So I end up with a shelf full of pink fabric. So it does find its way in. I often work in batches with my quilts or in series. So sometimes the series will be quite pink. After that, I will definitely steer in a different direction because I've had enough pink, but it does come back.
Just mentioned that you work in series. Do you know at the beginning how many you're going to make, or it just comes when it comes?
I've had both approaches. Sometimes I have the whole collection mapped out before I start making the first quilt, like rough sketches, sizes, and how many. Sometimes it grows organically. I'm very goal driven. So I like to plan a whole collection out and know exactly what I'm doing every day to accomplish that collection. But life's busy, and I've had to teach myself not to do that because it's led to a bit of burnout. So right now I have to remind myself to just see what comes out of it. But I still catch myself. Earlier in the year, I made a collection and I did still have a plan for how many, but I didn't quite make it to the full amount in that collection, and that's okay. So yeah, both approaches work.
So let me just go back a bit into your beginning of your textile art. You've got a beautiful style there, very, I'm going to say fibrous, because you just have all this beautiful texture coming out of your flowers. How long did it take to develop that type of skill?
Well, it's hard to say, because of all those things that lead to you saying, oh, actually, I'm going to try this. But early on, I joined a local contemporary quilt group. So it was a group of quilters focused on pushing the boundaries of quilting, trying like art quilters, basically. And we worked for a while there. Every month we had a new challenge, trying different techniques or different themes. And that was just right for me at that time of my creative journey because it gave me the framework in which to experiment with different things. The reason I joined that group was because I had submitted a quilt to the local quilt show without knowing any of the other quilters that were part of that organisation. And it had done really well, but it was an applique quilt. It was hand-dyed fabric, but it was applique. People loved it. A lot of people spoke to me and said, why don't you join us? You need to take this further. But I didn't love the raw edge applique process. I loved the way the quilt turned out, but I knew that the process wasn't for me. So I'd already decided that. So in those experiments, I knew I wanted to do piecing rather than applique, and that's a personal thing. I enjoy the piecework. So I made a sample of a gum leaf with the process that I thought I wanted to try, and that worked. So I made a large art quilt with some eucalyptus leaves, and that worked. But the eucalyptus leaves, there's these long, smooth, gentle curves. There's nothing too tricky in that, really. So I knew the process worked for leaves, but I thought, what if I put a blossom in the quilt? So I designed a matching quilt with leaves, but then I kind of plonked a blossom in the middle. And eucalyptus blossoms are not simple. They're round and they've got lots of filaments or fibers. So I thought, I have no idea if this is going to work. So I did all the outside bits first, avoiding the tricky section where the blossom was. And I just kept going and kept going. And suddenly the blossom was pieced and it all came together. And that's when I kind of thought, now I can do anything with this process. So after that, it's just been a matter of knowing my boundaries within that process. And I keep pushing them. That's me. I keep pushing up against the boundaries. So those boundaries are pretty much the size of the smallest pieces. And that's very limiting in my childhood pieces. I like to do a lot of pieces that capture children, and the children are captured through black lines that resemble a pencil sketch. And those black lines are pieced in the same way that I piece my blossom quilts. So when it gets to the eyeballs, they're typically the smallest part. And so the size of the eyeballs needs to be manageable, and that determines the scale of the quilt, if that makes sense. And the other limiting thing then is how tight the curves can go. And I regularly find myself pushing that boundary too far and realizing my quilt's a mess. It doesn't sit nice because I've just gone too tight, too fine. But yeah, so the actual sorting out the process initially didn't take long at all because it's a very simple process. So what I do is draw my design full size, and then I trace that onto iron-on interfacing, the full size design, and that iron-on interfacing becomes my working pattern. So that will get cut up into the different quilt pieces, the interfacing, and then each piece of interfacing gets ironed onto the correct color fabric, and then with a seam allowance cut around it, and then it's putting it back together like a fabric jigsaw puzzle.
So do you sew it all together with a sewing machine, or do you do some hand turned edge applique?
So no applique, it's all sewing machine. So it's all stitched right sides together like you would if they were just squares. And for a long time it was all machine work because I was too impatient to do handwork. And then I realized I needed to slow down, and I started doing a lot by hand because then it became almost therapy, just really enjoying. But it's still the same process. I'm still, when I do it by hand, I'm still piecing it the same way as by machine, but just using a fine running stitch instead. And I actually find now that that when I'm capturing children's faces, doing it by hand just gives me a much nicer finish. It gives me better control, and there's a little bit of ease in a hand stitch seam that I don't get in a machine stitch seam. So a bit of both.
When you're making the quilt sandwich, are you also doing hand sewing, or are you doing that by machine?
Also both, but I will always do machine because I like to just stitch most of my seam lines to hold it all down. And then I go back and forth between this. Sometimes I like to do a whole lot of camphor style stitching in the background, fixed thread, big stitches by hand. And other times I will quilt it intensely by machine. Depends where I'm at.
Do you incorporate all those ideas in the whole series, or do you use them separately in different series?
Probably separately in different series, and it changes depending what's going on in my life. Usually a series has a cohesive look, so I've probably chosen the same set of techniques to use. So sometimes I actually use some screen printing as well in the background of my quilts. So that gives a quilt a very different look to one that doesn't incorporate that. So my most recent series, the one on the easel here, is part of that series, has no printing and it's all machine quilted. So yeah, depends what I've decided to stick with for that series. But yeah, then I do most of the quilts in a series will then incorporate those chosen techniques.
How do you decide how big to make your piece?
Yeah, the one right behind me is one of my bigger ones. It's always a trade-off. So I sell a lot of my work, and the big ones are very expensive, so they don't sell so well. Obviously, it's not just the price, it's also people don't necessarily have the wall space to hang a piece like that. So it's still my dream to get them into corporate spaces or hotels or things like that, the really big ones, because it's a constant battle for me to size down. I always find myself getting carried away, going bigger, including more, and having to go, no, just keep it small, keep it manageable. So when I say I made a collection earlier this year, that collection was made with the idea of sellable pieces. So that one there is one of the bigger ones in the collection. I think you can see it's stretched and got like a gallery wrap frame. I find that also works it helps people to say, oh yeah, and I can hang that straight on my wall. I think that works for a lot of people, but especially when I'm working on my childhood pieces, the quilt can never be big enough for my liking because there's just so much I want to capture. So I do both because we've got to play and have fun. It's not just about, what people might buy.
Can you tell us more about your new series?
It's called Eucalyptus because I looked at the word eucalyptus, and that word comes from the Greek word eucalyptus, which means well covered, and that referred to the wooden caps that all these eucalyptus flowers have before they burst into flower. And you can probably see some towards the top of this piece. So they're like the nuts before they open. And I thought it's interesting that they're all called eucalyptus when what we love is when the blossoms burst out of those coverings. So I looked up the Greek word for uncovered, which is eucalyptus. So that's the name of the collection. I didn't have a big story in the collection other than just capturing that beauty. And I go back to that over and over. I like to venture out in something like a childhood collection. That's really my exploring my creativity in a really strong way. And then I'll come back to something that's just familiar and joyful, comfortable, and that people just really relate to really well. And so I come back to the eucalyptus pieces. So this collection, for example, had a star piece, which was a bit bigger than this, a bit wider, a little bit higher. So I called that the feature piece of the collection. And then I made 4 that are this size and 6 that were less than half that size. So there was a bit of variety. I like having a few the same size because I think that's visually appealing if you're displaying them in an exhibition space. But I also like to have some varying sizes. Different people have different interests or needs. So
Now you've been doing a block of the month with some of these techniques, have you not?
yes,
So is it a 12-month block of the month? Are you going to continue it on in 2022?
it's 12 months and we didn't get started until I think I sent out the first block in May. Thanks to COVID, the fabric took way too long to arrive. So yeah, it's 12 months. So last month will be April. And it's actually been such an incredible experience. I've never done a block of the month myself. And I have constant requests to teach workshops. I'm an introvert, so that's really draining, even though I find it really rewarding. But it's always been a juggle for me between I need my energy for my family or I want to give to my workshop students. So I really limit my teaching to what I feel I can comfortably manage. But I just get constant requests. Can you teach? And now, since COVID, can you teach online? Or I can't make it to one of your classes. Can I buy a pattern? So I have taught a bunch of classes. I've taught many classes. So that has made this block of the month project possible because I've learned a lot through teaching classes. So now I finally thought, you know what, I am ready to package it. By that I mean present and teach my process to people who I'm not in the same room with. And it just went like a wildfire. It's just amazing.
Well, I just saw it yesterday
yeah.
and I went, I want to jump on board this. The colors are so amazing and
Yeah,
derivative of what you're doing there in your work.
Yes. And I wanted it to be something that people are drawn to my work partly because of the subject matter. A lot of people are. So I wanted it to be that, but I wanted to teach my process. I don't typically work in blocks like that. So that was a fun challenge for me because it is a block, literally a block a month. Well, there's 16 blocks. So some months people get 2 blocks so that we get it all done within 12 months. So coming up with the design was fun, working out just all the logistics and then wondering if anyone would join. And it's just been incredible. So I released 50 exclusive places and those people get hand-dyed fabric sent to them every month because I know a lot of people really want to get their hands on some hand-dyed fabric. But then I thought that's going to be too expensive for some people. So I thought I'll release a digital one as well. Don't know how that'll go, but I'll just do a digital version for those who can't afford the hand-dyed fabric. And the exclusive subscriptions sold out within a day. I was limited on that because of how much fabric I had dyed. And the basic subscriptions just went on and on and on. And I thought I would shut it down because I didn't think I could handle late signups. But the problem was that around the deadline that I had for closing subscription, the first subscribers were sharing their first block on Instagram, on social media. So suddenly there were people everywhere that wanted to join in. And it blows my mind. I even thought it'll only interest Australians because it's eucalyptus. And there are people all over the world, Russia, India, Namibia, Switzerland. There's just people everywhere that are doing it. And they'll tell me, they'll email me and say, oh, a lady was just in my quilt shop choosing fabrics for your block of the month and I want to join. Can I join now? Because she's just seen the picture that the lady brought into the shop. So yeah, it's been an incredible journey.
It may be too early to ask this, but do you think you'll do it again?
I'm sure I will, but not next year. So what I'd love to do next year is just release a pattern. So now that there are a lot of people that know my process and have tried a more simple version, And that's still available on my website, Block of the Month, for anyone that still thinks they want to give it a go, and it includes video tutorials and things. But now I have a lot of people saying, I want more patterns, something a little more challenging. So I'm thinking of something like an annual pattern release. I don't want to just be busy with patterns and teaching, because I also want to be doing my own creative work of creating artwork, because that feeds future patterns as well. So there's a balance there. But yeah, I'm hoping to release a pattern next year.
Now, you mentioned your family. I understand that your sewing machine is in your family room and your kids have a table in your studio. Is that still true?
It varies. So it's not in the family room at the moment. It was while I had babies. So my studio is upstairs and it overlooks the living room, which is perfect for me. I can hear what's going on and speak to the kids if I need to. So yeah, while I had babies, I would often sew at the dining table still. I actually have a beautiful vintage hand crank machine that I use for that, because for my piecing, it's perfect. It gives me very good control. And I love it if I'm sewing in the family room, there's no power cords to worry about, and it looks nice. So, but now that the kids are at school, I'm mostly in my studio, unless I'm hand stitching. They did have desks in the studio. I've sort of taken them over. I've taken over the whole space. And I've kicked the kids out.
Well, my next question was, do they know how to quilt? But I guess if you've kicked them out.
They all have at some stage done some quilting and sewing off and on. They don't spend a whole lot of time. The 4 youngest are boys, so there's not a whole lot of keeping them all still in the one space to focus on sewing.
So you make these beautiful, beautiful textile arts. Do you ever dabble just in making a blanket for a bed?
Yes. I actually dream of just making a blanket for a bed. I make functional quilts. I actually just love to make a quilt that's just squares. And then it's about the fabric selection, just finding a bunch of fabrics that I just love together. So all my kids have one of those. So that's their cubby quilt. That's if they want to go outside and read outside, they take their quilt. And as choosing the fabric for those was a lot of fun. And I'm currently working on a hexagon quilt, which is all picture book fabrics. So the Hungry Caterpillar, well, this is an Australian one, but Snugglepot and Cuddlepie. So all the fabrics have pictures that come from children's books, because I love children's books. And that they're small hexagons, and it's my slow burner project, and I love it. So yes, I do.
I ask everybody about the label that they put on their quilts. Now, with yours being on walls, I know you've got that gorgeous chop. Do you put that on the front of your quilts, or do you put that on the back?
I put it on the front. There is a label that I use on the back, and that's actually one that I screen print. It's got all my contact details on there. I'm actually conscious that it can be removed quite easily. It can just be peeled off. So that's what motivated me to make the stamp for the front. Also, because every time I said, I must quilt my name into the quilt, and I'd finish it all and say, I'm done, and then realize I hadn't put my name into the quilt. I just never managed to remember to quilt my name into the quilt. So my little stamp on the front is my way of doing that. And I love it.
I like it too. I like it a lot. Are you a member of a guild?
Off and on. So I have been a member of our Western Australian Quilt Association off and on during the years. It's been a while since I've been involved in quilt shows, just because of family life. So yeah, I used to attend the quilt group, but again, the kids, it got too busy with the kids, finding babysitters and things like that. So that has slipped. So not really a guild. I'm a member of a art quilt association here in Australia. But the thing is that my quilt making is also an art form. So I'm a member of a couple of specific art associations, not just textile art, but art associations. And then I was a member of some quilt guild. I was a member of some art quilt associations. And I'm also, through this work, I've gone into picture book illustration. So I'm also a member of an illustration, it's Squeeby, which is an author and illustrator group. And I said to my husband, I just have to narrow it down, because I can't be a member of everything. So yeah, not at the moment, but off and on, I have been, and I'm sure I will be again.
So if people want to get your block of the month or sign up to your newsletter, how do they get in contact with you?
They're best off visiting my website, which is www.ruthdevos.com. And that's where everything is based, and the block of the month is available through the gift shop. And otherwise, I'm on Instagram, which is the other good spot to see what's happening. And that's Ruth de Vos Art.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. You've been an absolute delight. I just love your work. I can't wait to buy my block of the month pattern.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely to chat.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Ruth de Vos as much as I did. I hope it inspires you to get into your sewing room and experiment. If you want to join her Block of the Month program, or see her work, or follow her on Instagram, I'll leave her contact information in the notes below. Next up on Karen's Quilt Circle is Samara Kaja, author of So Adorkable, and we will be talking about the wacky, the wonderful, and the whimsical, and you don't want to miss it, so be sure to subscribe. Next time you're in your sewing room, be sure to have Karen's Quilt Circle playing on in the background. I have interviewed so many interesting, amazing quilters. Let one inspire you. And check out my last video on organizational mistakes. So take care, and I'll see you next time.